cool. So, ooh, super loud. I was on my way home and oh, test, test, test. One, two, three. Testing, testing. One, two, three. That's not how I usually do that. How I usually do that? Test, test. One, two, three. Test, test. One, two, three, four. Test. One, two, three, four, five. Test, test, test. One, two. I feel like I haven't done that in so long. Wow, I feel like I say it differently. Testing, testing. One, two, three. It's not how I do it. Testing, testing. One, two, three. Testing.
Morning.
Yeah, 4.8, we'll just take that.
The mics are up.
Yeah, we can move 4.8 up to right with Alice's report.
Okay. Okay, so I welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Pelham Board of Education of October 11th, 2022. Please stand and for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Ask Mr. Roth for a reiteration of the executive session motions.
Yeah, we entered into executive session to discuss the matter of an individual student.
Thank you. Again, welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's so happy. Our school year definitely feels like we're in full swing. Congratulations to the girls' field hockey team for their homecoming victory over Harrison. That was very exciting. On our agenda tonight, Pelham Civics Association is offering a generous donation in support of the Academy Plus program. So we definitely send our gratitude to them. And for those who haven't already bought their tickets, there is a Pelham Civics Gala is Friday, October 14th at 7 p.m. And it's in honor of Mayor Michael Volpe, former mayor, and Philip Carfora. And people can still buy tickets at pelhamcivics.org. It's going to be a lot of fun and supporting a very important organization.
And pasta night tomorrow at Siwanoy.
That's true. Also, October is Digital Citizenship Month, and there will be many activities focused on digital citizenship and digital fluency, I think we say sometimes. One upcoming activity is a parents' talk on raising children in the age of screens, which is quite challenging, so I'd be curious to get some tips. That is being sponsored, I believe, by Pelham Together this Thursday, October 13th, and people can go to pelhamtogether.org to register for that. And the board has an upcoming event, our board coffee, on October 28th at 9 a.m. at J Cafe. So we certainly look forward to seeing people there and getting more feedback and support and comments from everybody in the community, and plenty of coffee. And I guess with that, part of our work this year is recommitting, renewing, reclaiming. So I want to go back to our retreat where we talked about our role as a board was to set strategic direction, develop and approve policies, provide financial stewardship and support, ensure oversight and accountability, and provide leadership for the community. So just to remind us of our work as we start our meeting tonight. So thank you, and with that, I'll pass it.
Minutes. We're going to do the minutes
Oh,
first.
minutes. Okay. 3.1, approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from September 28th, 2022?
Motion to approve minutes from September 28th, 2022.
Thank you.
Second.
Second, Natalie. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And now 4.1, superintendent's report.
Okay, I want to reiterate that. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Again, yeah, we had an exciting homecoming weekend. We had this special treat of having our girls field hockey play in one against Harrison, which was awesome. So thanks to I know I saw Natalie there. We got to enjoy some of that time together. And kids and parents and family and community all had a great time. And the rest of the weekend was wonderful too. Soccer games and volleyball were some of the other events that I got to. So it was great to see the kids in action. Yes, I figured you would do it. So great to see the kids in action, and really appreciate all their efforts. Just a couple quick items, because I know we've got some substantive presentations tonight. Jim Rickey, and sorry if I'm stealing this from your report, Jim, it's one less thing you have to say. Jim and John Condon and I met with representatives from the Pelham Junior League. This past week, we got to walk the Julianne's playground property and review the plans that Junior League had put together prior to COVID, to kind of getting those plans back on track. So really great to be there in the park with them and really look at what those plans would look like in place. And they should be coming out with more information as they're going back, double checking prices, planning, and hopefully looking to divide that work into different phases that will help on the fundraising side as well as the construction side. So just want folks to know that that is moving along. We have a curriculum night coming up for our 3rd through 5th graders on the 17th. That's at Prospect Hill, so you can cross that one off your list, Dr. Bowman. So we'll be at Prospect Hill because a great auditorium there for the presentation, and then classrooms so parents can be right in the elementary classroom setting. So please come out for that if you want to learn more about ELA, math, science, social studies as they are being taught to our elementary students. Michael and Ian and I spent quite an extensive amount of time this morning into this afternoon going through committee applications. So thanks to all the community members, a wealth of folks applied again this year, lots of interest, and we're really thankful for that and excited for that. Unfortunately, that means we can't seat everybody who applied, but we I think came up with a really good mix of some continuing folks and some new folks into that. So we'll be sharing those names with the board over the next, probably tomorrow, over the course of this next week, and then we should be notifying folks next week if they were selected to serve on our committees. It's going to be important for folks to confirm their availability because our meetings, we do plan to have them in person this year as opposed to remote. And many of them, given the membership of the committees, need to be during the workday, whether it's first thing in the morning, during the school day, or just in the afternoon after school. So I'll be sending those notifications out next week. And one more thing I would add, Michael mentioned our work session coming up next time, Digital Citizenship Month. The work session will be on digital fluency, digital citizenship. We have added a parent info session that same night here in this very room at 6 o'clock. So Alex is working with Alice and John Sabalos to put together some materials to push information out to invite parents. So we'll have a 6 o'clock info session here for parents to come in, understand a little bit more about what we do for digital citizenship and digital literacy and fluency. And then if they like, they can stay for our work session. We thought that might be a nice way to engage folks a little bit more in coming to the meetings. So with that, I'm going to end because, again, we've got some great presentations tonight. Thank you.
Okay, 4.2 is Board of Education Committee reports.
We have an
Audit committee.
meeting. Yes. So on October 5th, we had a morning audit committee meeting. Yeah, and it looks like just on time. Our auditors are arriving. And we spent the bulk of the committee meeting talking about the external audit. And I will not go into depth because they're here to do that. And actually, we will be voting to adopt that later in the agenda. But I think it's important to say that we received a clean, unmodified opinion, right? So what does that mean? It means there were no difficulties, no uncorrected misstatements, no disagreements, right? So a fully clean audit, which is not surprising, given the staff that we have and the history that we have, but always really good news. We also talked a bit about the internal audit, and that the agreed-upon procedures and the field work have commenced in the area of cash activities, payment on payroll withholdings, and purchasing. I hope I got that right, Jim?
He's over.
He's chatting with the auditors. I think that's pretty much right. We also talked about the claims audit, which will be happening later on in the year, and we'll bring you an update on that at an upcoming meeting. And again, the bulk of it was on the external audit, so you'll hear the full presentation from the auditors. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other committee reports? I don't think so, right?
It's not on the agenda right now, anyway. It's not on the agenda right now.
Should we go to Alice next?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we can go to Alice.
Okay.
He's got to
Gotta wait for the partner.
Do that, just let him go. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably a really nice idea.
What,
That would be in personnel, 7.1, I think.
Okay.
7.1.
right, so I could, do we need to vote to move something on the agenda, or?
To take a motion.
Okay. So I see an honored guest in the audience, so I'd just like to take a motion to move forward item 7.1, motion to approve Schedule A instructional under superintendent's personnel recommendations.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second,
I'm happy to speak to one item on this.
Okay.
We're really pleased tonight to have Rafi Fraungen with us. He has stepped in as the lead replacement in our orchestra program. I had the pleasure of stepping in this morning to see some of the orchestra class, and it just brought me right back. Palladio, I think, is what we were listening to, a couple other pieces. The kids are already working really hard, and the kids come in at 7:30 in the morning, and they do a phenomenal job. So we're really thrilled to have someone with his expertise and background here joining us and filling in an important program piece for us. And this approval, Rafi will be here doing a leave replacement for us through, it's going to be a little mix of a position, but he's going to be here through
January.
through January. Thank you.
And then, we're hoping to see how it progresses from there.
Correct.
Right.
So we're pleased to have him with us tonight, so that's why we want to move that up.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you.
Any opposed, any abstentions?
All right. Congratulations. Thank you, Rafi.
Thank you for coming.
And since you have a 7:30 a.m. class, please feel free to go. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Bowman.
Yes, so now we'll go back to section 4, and 4.3 is Assistant Superintendent's update on authentic learning.
Should I do my report and then my report?
Sure.
Okay. So over the last few weeks in the teaching and learning area, we had our first curriculum night on October 3rd, and that was for our K-2 parents. It was held at Prospect Hill. Dr. Callahan and Mr. Sabalas led the curriculum night. However, the presentation itself was planned by Dr. Callahan, Mr. Sabalas, and Dr. Thompson, who's here this evening. During that event, there was an overview of our academic program for the primary grades, followed up by 2 breakout sessions, one for our ELA curriculum overview and the other one for our mathematics overview. In those sessions, led by Kate Alex, Nancy Montano, and Beth Finkelstein, parents had the opportunity to see how, well, firsthand, what happens in a classroom in a primary grade, and also how they can support the work that happens in school while their children are at home on the evenings and weekends. Despite the weather, which didn't really want to cooperate with an in-person event, there was ample representation from the community, and so there's clearly an investment from the parent community in bringing back in-person events and, of course, supporting their children. In terms of the elementary report cards,
Microphone.
okay, sorry. First person who ever told me I wasn't loud enough. The elementary report cards will be finalized by the end of this week. We did a comprehensive review and made sure that every single bullet of every single item in every single discipline on each of the grades from K to 5 were in alignment with the standards and represented what the teachers would be teaching, the students would be expected to be learning, and how that would be assessed at each trimester's end. So the next steps on that will include presentations to faculty and staff at upcoming meetings, and parent communication following that, all in time for the end of the first trimester in November. An update on Branching Minds, which will be the platform that we are using to help consolidate our data regarding student interventions in our MTSS program. I had our customization meeting this morning, and I'm happy to report that we are well on our way. We have planned professional development through the fall semester, so that by the time in January we have progress monitoring assessments administered to our students, and we have that second set of growth data, we'll be able to utilize that to inform our practices and ensure that students are being given the proper tier of intervention. The dates for those are as I said, throughout the fall, right now, what's happening is our historical and current data in terms of student assessment information and student attendance is being integrated into the system. I have out to our buildings a Roots Report survey, which helps to indicate what level of interventions we have in terms of the system and progress and what needs each of the leaders sees that we need to bring forward, and how Branching Minds might be able to facilitate that with their different levels of professional development, which really do fall under different tiers. The first tier is for the coordinator, who happens to be me right now. Following that, we have our instructional leadership launch, which will be for our curriculum and curriculum leaders in each of the disciplines, as well as building leaders. And then following that will be the support team, which will start with our interventionists so that they really have a keen understanding of what the data is that is being provided and how to utilize that to inform instruction and meet students' focused and targeted needs on each of the 3 tiers of intervention. And then I have the student performance report, which I'm going to go to the other microphone to present, if that's okay.
Thank you. And while Alice is transitioning, I will say on the report card, Sue, you'll be happy to know that even went as far as looking at the Oxford comma. And when we got down to that level of debate, we knew that it was in good shape.
Guaranteed to my heart.
Knew you
Thank
would appreciate that. I would say too, Alice has been doing just a phenomenal job of diving in and really understanding, working with the curriculum directors. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for being here tonight. And I know Dr. Callahan was out today. He would be here likely as well. And our building leaders to really understand the data and understand things that were in place even before she was here. So really appreciate the work that she's done. And I just wanted to share tonight, Dr. Bowman is going to be looking at sharing with us the district level data. We generally have not traditionally presented at this level at the building level at the elementary schools for a variety of reasons. Most of which is when you get down to the building level, you only have two or three sections per grade level. So there are, the sample size gets very small, and there are big swings in results, potentially from the results of 1 or 2 children. So we don't know that there are, you can't make as valid or generalizable statements when you get analysis of the data when you get down to that level. It can be very, people can often make some faulty or inaccurate assumptions at that level. And add reasons to that or comparisons between the schools that are not necessarily founded in just the reality. And we didn't want people to misuse it at that level. Those are generally the reasons that we don't. I will say that the data itself will eventually be publicly available at the building level at the data.nysed.gov website. The state puts all the state assessment data there, school report card on an annual basis. So you can see all the historical data there at any time. It's not there yet. Last time we checked, I don't believe it was posted yet, but it will eventually be there. What's most important, though, I think for parents, because I know that we're all concerned about our students' progress, our teachers already have the student level data, parents having that student level data. Those are the most critical pieces of these results. So this is going to be a snapshot, and Dr. Bowman's going to give us a great context for that. But please know that we have that student level data. The buildings and the departments have been digging into that and taking action on that already. So I think that's, even though folks may not see everything that they want to see tonight, the most important information about what's actionable for individual children is in hand and has already been something we've been analyzing and acting on up to this point. So with that, I think Dr. Bowman is ready to go.
I am.
And turn over to her.
So first, I would like to thank you as a board for your support and also for the opportunity to share with you my new learning on both the context, the history, and the current state of affairs for our students in K through 12. As with everything, we try to hearken back to what our strategic plan is for the district. And in terms of tonight's presentation, I want to just highlight that the data that you see is really how it relates to our systemic academic support, which is tied to the third goal of the whole child. So when we talk a little bit later about MTSS, understand that while we are talking about academic supports, there are other functions that are within the MTSS model that are going to be at play when we talk more broadly about interventions for children. Framed around some guiding questions, we are dealing with first of all, what is the status of our district and how are we delivering on the inspiring a standard of excellence for all students promise that we have for our children? And what structures do we have in place and what structures are we putting into place in order to continuously improve upon the status that we have right now? Measurements of progress and achievement. So we want to talk about which assessments are we using to measure that progress, measure that achievement and growth, and how do they support teaching and learning, both for our faculty and staff and for our students alike. So as you take a moment to look at some of the different items on this slide, I just want to highlight that we are discussing the relationship here between our values and the measurements that we use. And so while we do want to talk about these assessments, we want to also bring into the discussion the idea that assessments are one measure of what we value, but what we value as a district really does go far beyond what can be measured and put onto a chart and analyzed, item by item. However, that being said, what you will see does inform our decisions for today and tomorrow, and certainly our goal setting for the second half of the year and the years moving forward. Again, just as a point of information, I mentioned earlier, we do have mid-year progress monitoring assessments that will be administered in January. And at that point, we'll be able to see what progress some of our students have been making in terms of meeting their annual goals and our annual goals for our groups of students as a whole. And so we'll have more information then. A word about assessment. I really think it's important that we break down a little bit what sorts of assessment we utilize in education and what sorts of assessment we have here in the presentation tonight. So it's important to understand that there really are essentially two different types of assessment. There are formative assessments, which progress monitor on a daily basis, are tied to student growth and what goes on in a classroom every day. Those types of assessments may or may not find themselves in a traditional grade book, but they certainly are things that are used to help inform instructional decisions, sometimes on the fly right in the middle of a classroom, or day by day, or over the course of a quarter, a trimester, a semester, and a year. Those are connected to learning experiences. The other sort of assessment is a summative assessment, and those assessments are based on external data, and so those are the sorts of things like end-of-year assessments, state assessments, things that we're going to look at tonight. Then when we talk about the types of measures, it could be growth measures, and those are changes over time based on an individual, whether that individual is an individual student, an individual group of students, an individual organization. It's growth over time, comparing where you were to where you are now and where you foresee yourself going, however you define that self. Whereas achievement is comparing where you present on a given day at a given time to a standard that's external. So for what we're going to be discussing tonight, we're talking about summative performance data, which is an important aspect of what we do, but is certainly not the whole picture, and something that I just want to make sure that we understand as we move forward. Certainly, COVID has had an impact on instruction and learning for all of us in many, many countless ways, and I do mean countless ways, but some of the different things that I want to highlight for you include the differences in assessment administration over the course of the last few years. So when you see assessment data compared over time, on my slides, you'll see that the most recent year that we have that would be comparable is 2019. And so while normally we might look at year-to-year change, we can't in the current situation because in the 1920 school year, as you see, there were no administrations of any assessments statewide like we're looking here. In the 2021 school year, there were, you'll see with the absence of chemistry and world history though, assessments given. However, because of state exemptions and safety nets, not all students sat for those exams. And so that data would be similar to comparing apples to oranges. This past year was most like what you would have found in a pre-pandemic timeframe. However, a point of information, you'll see that I don't have U.S. history listed. If you recall, in the spring, just prior to the U.S. history regents being administered, it was called back because some of the material was thought to have possibly been triggering for students in wake of the shooting in Buffalo. So those are some of the factors. I also want to talk about some of the impacts that interrupted instructional time might have had over the course of the pandemic. So we went from March of 2020 through April of 2021 with interrupted instruction. From March of 2020 through the end of the school year, we pivoted to all virtual, and students and teachers and families were all pivoting seemingly continuously from that time. And then in the 2021 school year, we began the school year with hybrid cohort A, cohort B in person every other day. And so there were adjustments made to that at that time as well. When we talk about instructional time changes, when we went virtual, we had a lot of concerns about the amount of screen time that children were going to be having. And the younger they were, the more the differences in the amount of screen time we saw. And so we wanted to make sure that as an organization, as an industry really, we compensated for some of those things, and by industry I mean education. And so like many districts, all districts, really we had to make some difficult decisions. And so in Pelham, prior to the pandemic, in ELA, which was reading discrete from writing, there were 45 minutes each of instruction given daily, whereas in math, each day there were 60 minutes. During the closure, so the time when we were home and virtual and the kids were on their computers learning, there were 30 minutes of reading each day, 30 minutes of writing each day, so 60 minutes of what you would have typically called ELA, right? And 30 minutes of math instruction. And so one of the other things that really needs to be addressed before I go into the details is that unlike reading and writing, which spiral and they are built on one another in a way that's conceptual and skills functioning, as opposed to concrete data that's concrete information that's unit-based, there had to be some things that were added or rather not added, but taken away from curriculum during those times. Tough decisions, but done strategically with the best interests of the children in mind at every turn. You'll also see that this instructional shift does have some implications in other departments because of the need to have a really strong algebraic foundation when you go into some upper level classes. And while we have all seen the age of students last year, when they were in 12th grade, the 12th graders now, where if you look at this, our first graders and our kindergarteners, well, it was clearly our kindergarteners, but they weren't in school at all. And a lot of our students who would have been assessed this year never had an assessment before. And so this was their first time at the rodeo, so to speak. When we talk about the New York State ELA and math assessments, just remember, there were no assessments administered in 2020 statewide, and in 2021 there was limited participation. And again, that's statewide, but our numbers were lower than they normally would have been. Going back to a normal administration coupled with a reduction in the number of students, families who are opting out of exams, we did have increased participation in the 2022 administration going forward, and you see the increase in participation as you go down in the grades. So the third grade cohorts have the highest participation rates, and it steadily decreases as you go up. And now, so when you look at our third and fourth graders, over the years, over the grade, you'll see that the third graders maintained proficiency, and they doubled in the percentage of students who received a level 4. So proficiency on the assessments is a level 3 or a level 4. And our students in third grade doubled the number of 4s. So that's, I'll call it super proficiency. Our grade 4 students maintained proficiency levels and increased their level 4s as well. Important to note is that I have our comparisons to the region. You'll see universally in ELA that our data compared to the region is very high. We do very well. And by region on the assessments, what I mean is all of Westchester, all of Putnam, and all of Rockland County. And so we do well in the area. 5th and 6th grade, our 5th graders maintained proficiency levels and increased their percentages of level 4s. And our 6th graders increased proficiency levels and maintained their level 4s over time. Our 7th graders increased proficiency by almost 20% over time, and the level 4s increased 15%. Our 8th graders increased in proficiency about 3%, and in 8th grade, our level 4s went from 46 to 44.4, which for all intents and purposes is really kind of maintaining. But I tend to highlight anything that's in the 2 or above range, and we're just under, so. When we talk about math, there are a few things that I want to, not to, like, shut down my presentation. There we go, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we talk about the math assessments, again, I want to reiterate that in 2020, there were no administrations, and in 2021, just like in ELA statewide, there was limited participation. Again, you'll see as we go through some of the math data, the fact that the instructional shifts that we had to make as a result of being on virtual did not align with the time frame for the administration of exams, meaning that there are certain units of study that had to be taught after the exams were administered, after the assessments were administered, but with the thinking behind that being that we needed the students to be at a place where they were ready. So you need to meet students where they are and assess what learning has taken place. And our teachers and our instructional leaders have done a great job of making sure that they knew that. And so when you look at the 3rd and 4th grade, we maintained proficiency in 3rd grade, and the level 4s were at 34%, and they became 30.14. Our 4th graders' proficiency was 77.4% and is now at 72.9. And our level 4s were at 47% and are at 36.5. When we go to grade 5, the proficiency levels were at 72.9 and are currently at 61.65. And our level 4s were at 38.4 and are currently at 33.3. Our 6th graders' proficiency levels were at 76.5% and are currently at 66.1. And our level 4s were at 39% and are currently at 30. Our 7th grade proficiency rate was at 67 and is now at 64.85, so just shy of the 2% flat marker that I have for myself. And our level 4s were at 33 and are currently at 30.3. Grade 8, it's very important to know that in Pelham, we do not double assess our 8th graders. Over half of our 8th grade students sit for the algebra regents, which means that the students who are most ready to take on accelerated mathematical concepts and skills and content are accelerated into our algebra program and are not sitting for the math assessment test. That's not the case in every district in the area. Some districts have fewer students in algebra and don't double assess. Other districts do double assess, so every student takes both. So again, when we look at the regional data as compared to the district data, it is apples and oranges because of differences in participation cohorts and profiles. In summary, you will see that we are consistently above the region in proficiency as well as in level 4s for our ELA in 3 to 8. And that between 21-22 and 2018-19, our 3rd through 5th graders maintained the same levels of proficiency, and our 6th through 8th graders increased in their proficiency levels. In math, you'll see that for the regional comparison, our 3rd through 7th graders were above the region in proficiency as well as our level 4s, and that our grade 8, although below the region, really it's comparing apples and oranges because our 8th graders who are in algebra do not take the Math 8 assessment, and we do have over half of our 8th graders in our algebra program. When we talk about proficiency, our grade 3 maintain the same percentage of students achieving proficiency, whereas we did see some drops in grades 4 through 8 as a result of many of the things that I discussed earlier in terms of differences to instructional models and needing to make decisions about curriculum during the closure. And this is not unique to Pelham, as I noted a few board meetings prior, and has been well documented and published in different areas. There are more dips in math than there are seen in reading nationwide, and I would say globally as well. So my next question would be, and now what? What are we doing about this to address any concerns that maybe have brought up? I want to talk to you for a minute about our MTSS program, which MTSS is multi-tiered, so systems of support. Essentially, there are 3 tiers. Tier 1 is what happens in a classroom with every student who's in front of you as a teacher, and you want to make sure that you address the individual needs of the students, make instructional shifts as needed based on what's going on, and all of our students, every single one of them, have opportunities and have teachers who care about them in front of them making those teacher moves every single day. Then we have students who, despite those best efforts and the high skill level of the teachers in front of them, do require more help and more supports. And so we put into place Tier 2 interventions. And those are targeted interventions where there are small groups of students who meet together, and we do employ progress monitoring. For some students, after a 6 to 8 week cycle in a Tier 2 intervention, we recognize that there are still some more needs and some more supports that need to be implemented in order to catch them up and fill the gaps in learning that they need, or to help us isolate what it is that's obstructing them from learning. And so those students will enter into Tier 3 interventions, and really the difference between a Tier 2 intervention and a Tier 3 intervention is the number of students in the group. It will be lower, so there's more concentrated one-on-one interaction between the teacher and the student, and also the frequency with which the teacher meets with the students. All of this happens prior to a referral to see if there is a need for classification. And one of the things that Branching Minds will provide for us is being able to gather as much assessment data as possible. So it will include the summative data that's part of this report, but it will also have a lot of the formative data that we collect, both informally in the classroom level, but also through our progress monitoring tools like AIMSweb, Dreambox, and things of that nature throughout the course of the year. We have had the luxury, and I mean that because we're very lucky here in Pelham, to have added 2 elementary interventionists to help support some of the needs that we've seen, as well as the addition of a middle school math interventionist. What both of those changes in staff have provided us is with the opportunity to kind of make sure that we are providing interventions on the 2nd and 3rd tier to students at the same rate, whether it's an ELA intervention or a math intervention. And so we expect to see that will be reflected in student learning very shortly. We are focusing our professional development. As I've mentioned in prior meetings, our team really looks at the data closely enough to see if there are standards that need to have more time focused on for groups of students or individual students or strands of different parts of the standards to help really fill out their learning profile so that they do have all of the skills that they need now to succeed, but also have the foundations that they need to succeed later academically. In Pelham, we have instructional rounds each year. We have professional learning communities, and our first professional learning community day is going to be on October 19th. And at that time, our teachers will begin to identify and formulate a strategy around the problem of practice that they identify so that they can be the leaders in their own professional development. Each of our buildings has a data team that reviews a lot of this data and is led by their district director or coordinator, depending upon the discipline. We have grade level meetings where teachers work to collaborate on planning and also on assessment of student progress so that they can best meet the needs of their students. And again, as I mentioned before, we have multiple measures of progress monitoring, including AIMSweb and Dreambox, and also teachers running records from TC, Readers and Writers Project, as well as Fontes and Pinnell benchmarking. And then we move to the high school.
Should we pause there if anybody has any comments or questions about this first section?
I just had a very quick question. How do you define the region?
Okay, so the region is Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland counties.
Okay.
And that's a really great transition question because the high school data is reported out differently by the LYRIC. They don't provide us with regional data in the same way for the secondary exams as they do for the middle school for the 3 to 8 assessments. However, I have looked at the data as it's compared to some of the districts that we have identified as being similar. And so while it's not in here, I do have information about that as well. But you'll see that that's not something that's on the presentation. Yes.
You mentioned the two interventionists that we added for this year's support. Any thoughts on the contingency 3rd intervention position that we have?
Yes, in looking at the data, it does seem as though the need is there to provide that third interventionist as something that will help to support providing interventions equitably between math and ELA, especially in the elementary buildings. So yes.
Okay, and is there, and sorry if this is something you don't have the information in front of you, any anticipated timeline for moving that process forward?
Well, I had mentioned it in a prior executive session, and I am going to be putting that into the notes for next time so that we can get a posting out. Dr. Garcia, be ready. So my
Fantastic.
timeline is as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Could you
Hi.
just talk a little, oh, sorry, go ahead. A little bit more about MTSS on the individual level and how that evaluation happens throughout the year. And, you know, so for any given student that's being evaluated in a certain tier, then what opportunities are there to be reevaluated, transitioned, you know, throughout the course of the year? We're only in October, right? So
Yeah.
what can people expect throughout the course of the year?
So there are two different ways that might happen, right? One is a matter of course when we do the mid-year assessments. If a student comes up showing that there, you know, the abundance of evidence supports the need for either greater interventions or a lessening of the interventions, then those decisions are made at that time. However, in the interim, there will be students who kind of bubble up to the top because of some things going on in the classroom, and the teachers are attentive to that. Or the teachers who are providing level 2 interventions will see that they're not working to the extent that they should be expecting those interventions to work. And so we have MTSS teams in each building. And in those instances, what happens is a child is referred to the MTSS team, and a portfolio is brought together, the team of individuals who are responsible for that child. So you need to have a clinician on the team who typically runs the meeting. You'll have a general ed teacher who's going to be part of that. You'll have an interventionist who's part of that, and you should have a special educator on there as well. And so the team will bring forward what they're seeing. And the goal of that is to make sure that if you are changing the interventions, that you're doing it strategically. So for example, sometimes you'll see a child who will be brought to the MTSS team because of a behavior issue, only to find out when you dig a little bit deeper, spending that extra time on that one child's profile, that the behavior is an avoidance mechanism because they're struggling with X skills. Or there is a concern that happens typically at the beginning of the day or after lunch when they've had a lot of sugar, or whatever the case may be. And so that provides you with an opportunity to really make sure that the interventions you're putting into place match the need of the child who's being presented. And so those two mechanisms really are what an ideal MTSS structure looks like and puts into place.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, you mentioned there's a math interventionist in the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
How about the ones in the elementary schools? Are those the interventionists doing both ELA and math, or do we separate them?
Both. So our interventionists are interventionists, and they have the capacity to intervene in ELA and reading or in math. However, the way that we have them scheduled, they typically have mostly one or the other. But they also are sometimes split between buildings, so there is a little bit of a mixture in that. But we do make sure, to get to what I imagine would be the crux of the question, that they are equipped with the skills that they need in order to aptly provide the interventions that the children need as well.
I was just going to add to that. We, and Dr. Garcia can probably speak to this as well, over the last couple of years as we've built the intervention staff, it's been really a very competitive position. And Maria may be able to speak to this as well. We've interviewed our own classroom teachers for those intervention positions because it was critical that we find people who are incredibly skilled in filling in these gaps. We also made a choice a few years ago to move to more of a general staff that could handle both ELA or math, so that we could get the greatest amount of staffing flexibility, so that we can really provide the greatest amount of intervention, as opposed to designating solely math or ELA, because the more constraints you put on that, the more difficult it is to schedule. But I think finding a sweet spot in there is, I feel like by adding the additional interventionists these last couple of years has helped us to really get the right people in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the detail around MTSS. if you put yourself in the shoes of a parent and you've opened the envelope for state tests and you don't like what you see and you're concerned and you think your child is struggling, who should a parent speak to? What should they expect? Just in practical terms, what does that process look like if you have concerns based on the data that you're seeing about your own child?
So having the luxury of sitting in that chair and being a parent who opens up the assessments, but also as an educator, I think that always the first person that you need to speak to and to develop that relationship with is the classroom teacher, because by now the classroom teachers have developed relationships with your children so that they really do have the best insight into what's going on. If you as a parent were shocked at the assessment results, you know, there is also missing from this year's individual reports a percentile of where your child falls as compared to the state. That's based on everything I said earlier about assessments and administrations and the anomalies that the last few years have provided. And so the state isn't providing that percentile information, which for some parents helps you to understand, even if it was a very low 3 or a high 2, I'm in the 70th percentile, so that's fantastic. It kind of informs your assessment. Once you have that information and you've developed those relationships with the teachers, you should be able to see from there that there are instructional shifts happening in the classroom to support your child. That being said, the next step after that, I would say, would be to an administrator. If it's a discipline-specific issue, then I would suggest that you reach out to the principal and also the curriculum director of that area, which for ELA would be Dr. Thompson, and for math, it would be Dr. Callahan. And those would be the folks who are the captains of the team who are going to do everything they can to make sure that your child has what they need to succeed and to clear up any learning gaps as well.
I think the data is very striking and very helpful to kind of clarify that there'd been some sort of sense of anxiety, but I feel like we can focus clearly on math 3 through 8, that, you know, that's an area of more support. So I think it's very helpful data to get, and because we've seen data presentations before, but we just didn't have this level of, I guess, information or, you know, the full state exam. So I feel like we're, you know, as a physician, I'm always getting towards a diagnosis. So I think this is a big step in the right direction, and thank you to the whole team for, I know you've been working on it for months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, to your point, I think one of the diagnostics that is important is that, you know, for example, one of the units that wasn't able to be taught in math across the board during the closure effectively would be measurement, right? Because there are some relativity issues, some issues with being able to touch things, you know, measure with a ruler, but also the differences in scale, right? When you're over a screen, that was the word I was searching for, scale. And so we are working on that, and already by the time I arrived and met first with my math team, they said, okay, so this is where you'll see that there are dips in the questions. Here are the standards where that happened, but here's what we're already doing to address that, and here's what's been put into place. And so what I have found to be wonderful and very skilled about this team is their understanding to that granular level where it is, and it's not specifically so that next year our assessment scores will look different. It's so that the kids know the skills, they have the skill set, they have the knowledge that they need, which I am grateful is not enslaved by the calendar of assessment administration. However, that being said, I do expect that you'll see in short order, you know, when you build it, they will come. There are going to be shifts in our results. But moving on to high school, what you'll see here is that our graduation rate has maintained a flat line. And by flat line, I mean it's not going to go any higher, despite all of the interruptions that COVID presented us. What is important to know, like every other district in New York State, there have been nets and there have been exemptions and there have been things put in place to make it so that kids could reach the graduation requirements with understanding of the difficulties that COVID presented. And again, I want to point out, I'll just bring it to the next slide, that our information here does not have regional data, but that's because it's impossible to get that data from the LYRIC. And I also want to point out that the score reports on the bottom are inverted. On the 3 to 8 assessments, the 4s, the proficiency in the 4 were at the top, and here they're at the bottom. Just look for the highlighted blue to see. That's really proficiency, but when you get to the high school, we call that passing. Essentially, you know, they are not the same thing, but for the sake of the report here, you could think of them that way.
Dr. Bowman, just for sake of, since we live in acronym world, LYRIC.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Lower Hudson Regional Information Center.
Right, it's the data warehouse.
It's new to me, too.
For the entire region. They're affiliated with the BOCES.
Yeah. And so again, you'll see that the data comparison here is between 2019, and that's because the exams administration most recent comparable date was in 2019. You'll also see that the English exam is a comprehensive exam, which really is a culmination of the work of every educator who has had their hands in the pot for raising our kids from kindergarten through grade 11. Of course, the teacher of record, when they have these exams, has done the, you know, made sure that everyone was absolutely ready for this culminating experience. But the success that you see here with a passing rate of 97% and a mastery rate that has increased to 77.45% really does speak to the success and the hard work of every single professional who works for the district on every level. Then we get to algebra. Again, I want to point out that half of our students in 8th grade are taking the algebra Regents, and this is their first Regents exam. Many of these students who sat for the Regents exam did not have any formal state testing before this past year, and so a very small number of students had the Math 7 assessment the year before, and when these students were in 6th grade, there was no assessment for them. And so you'll see the data here. Okay, when we get to geometry, again, geometry, while it is a course away from algebra and a few years away from Math 8, the foundation of algebraic skills is fundamental to being able to succeed in geometry. And so while our passing rate was 94.9, and it was this past year 73%, a lot of that has to do with important decisions that were made during the pandemic and the fallout of those decisions. However, please understand that this is a snapshot in time, and while it is apples to apples in some ways in terms of the assessment itself, it's apples to oranges because the cohort of students in 2019 did not have interrupted instruction, right? So we're comparing, so there's a double impact of those changes on the way that we see the data. Similarly, in earth science, our passing rate was 93% and is now 89.4, and our mastery rate was 66.5 and is now 51.15. Our earth science cohort is all of our 8th graders. So every single one of our 8th graders takes the earth science regents exam. So it is traditionally their first science regents exam ever. This group is no different. But what is different for this group is that they are not having come to the assessment administration with the same number of assessments under their belt as other cohorts have, which I won't repeat again and again because I think you, but it is something that carries through. When we look at living environment, we maintained our passing rate, and our mastery rate was at 71.5, and this year was at 62.7. For chemistry, which is another class, even though it is in the science department, does have a heavy mathematical underpinning requirement, and so the algebraic needs of these students would be demonstrated in the data. The passing rate was 87.57 and is now 67.28. The mastery rate was 28.65 and is now at 28.57. So essentially for our mastery rate, we maintain the same level, which I think is important to highlight here. Another thing specifically about chemistry that I'd like to point out is that unlike other districts, we do encourage as many of our students as are up for the challenge to enroll in our chemistry class and therefore sit for the chemistry regents at the end of the year. However, the chemistry regents is, if not the most difficult regents exam, the second most, but certainly the most difficult regents exam that we administer here in Pelham. I think we could make an argument between chemistry and physics. Luckily, we don't have to, but we'll move on. Global history. Something that's really important for you to understand about global is that in 2019, the course itself was fundamentally different. In 2019, it was a 2-year curriculum that was assessed at the end of 10th grade, and it was aligned to the Common Core standards. And this year, it's the 10th grade curriculum, and it is under the Next Gen framework. And so, again, the best we have is 2019, but it's also, I would say, apples and pears. That being said, if you look, we have 97% of our students passing, and when I look at the 13 districts that typically are comparable districts, we are in the top half of those districts in terms of the mastery of the global regions. So in summary, some of what I said is here in this chart. Our English exam increased passing, increased mastery, and the English exam is really a culmination of grades K through 8, but also students have assessment experience sitting for the assessments in ELA in 3 to 8. Our algebra students had a spiraled curriculum. This is their first Regents exam in math, and COVID interruptions created the need for instructional shifts to fill those gaps. Same with geometry. What we have here is that all students are encouraged to enroll in the geometry course and sit for the Regents exam, which is different. Some of our neighboring districts don't offer geometry. Some of them do, but for a very specialized group of students. We have some neighboring districts that administered the geometry and the chemistry Regents to one student. The cohort was clearly significantly larger, but we offer this to as many students who are up for the challenge as we can. Earth Sciences Acceleration for All, and it's their first Regents exam in science. Living Environment. For our students, the Living Environment Regents this year was their first Regents exam in science. And again, chemistry and global history, it was the first year with the new framework.
What do you mean by spiraled curriculum?
Sure. So a spiraled curriculum essentially is where you start with content on a level, let's say 5th grade level, and then that goes through and gets more complex as you go to 6th grade, but it's essentially the same, it's a similar idea, and gets more complex as you go up through the years. So I can say that when you take chemistry as a 10th grader, it is chemistry, and you'll need that foundation in order to take inorganic and organic chemistry in college, but they're vastly different, right? And so that's because of the spiraling that happens. Again, we have MTSS on the secondary level with a similar framework, with similar interventions being provided to students based on the different tiers. Again, we had the addition of the middle school math interventionists in the secondary level, as well as changing the way that we provide those interventions to make sure that the ELA and the math interventions are provided equitably. We've had focused professional development through the year. On the right column, I want to point out that we've had some grading shifts happen on the secondary level so that the grades that are provided to students at the end of the marking period not only encompass what we would call summative data, but are also based on projects, are also based on formative data, and also the process of learning throughout the course of the marking period. And those were very much part of the plan to help address some of the losses that we've seen. In summary, the state assessment data does provide the district with information about how students performed on a specific assessment on a specific date. This information is absolutely useful. However, it's limited. It's useful to inform instruction, so we're able to see, are there areas of the curriculum that need to be more, spend more time on? Are there things that we've been spending too much time on that we can move through because the children understand it? Progress monitoring of students and programs again, seeing that the kids are growing at the rate that we want to see them growing. It informs strategic planning. So when I say that, some things like staffing, different professional development focus areas, and it's helpful to MTSS. This performance report includes summative and performance assessment data. However, we do want to fill out that whole profile of a student and include formative and growth information when we're really working to provide the correct interventions for kids.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any
That's great.
questions?
Can you describe in a little more detail how you're doing interventions with regards to algebra? Because that's a foundation for some of the other courses, right, as they move through high school. Is there anything kind of special we're doing there, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, what's happened is that we have made sure that for our current algebra students, the planning started last year when they were in 7th grade. And so some of the shifts in the idea that they're spiraling, that happens. There was movement in the curriculum, but now we've tried to capitalize on the time that's allotted to be very strategic in the timing of each skill. So when you reduce the amount of time that a certain skill is taught, because the kids are getting it more quickly, it opens up so that you can put in more time to where there may have been a lack of instruction because of constraints over COVID. And so those instructional things have been happening. What we're also doing is making sure that we have had, in years past here, the 20% of the most struggling students in ELA, so, right, they were given interventions, tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And the lower 15%, the most struggling students in math. The added interventionists have allowed for us to capture that 5% difference. Many of those students will have found themselves in algebra, and so they'll get those extra interventions in that way.
Just one last question on elementary. Since it's a district-wide view, did you get a sense that the results were consistent across all 4, or was there variability that's leading you to think of differently in terms of campus-specific supports?
So I wouldn't say that they were flat across grades, across buildings. But to that point, for example, if you have a grade that only has 2 sections, let's say that that's at most 50 students, each student in that school would be worth 2% of the assessment score. And so, you know, some of that data to me is difficult to say it's a building level issue or it's a grade level issue, because on any given Tuesday, an 8-year-old may or may not show up with their best self to take the math assessment based on whether their next door neighbor best friend was out sick or, you know, so there are so many competing factors. So while I cannot say that there is consistency between grades amongst the buildings, I can tell you that I don't see anything that indicates that there is a specific concern coming out of one building or one grade in one building. Otherwise, we would be having a different conversation.
Yep.
I have a question that maybe, Dr. Thompson, not to put you on the spot, but I know we've talked for a number of years about the next gen standards coming, and they've arrived at an interesting time given all the COVID context that you gave us. So given that this was the first time that students, in particular global, were assessed on these new standards, what information do you think you were able to gain from this year's assessment, given that we were always going to have that at some point? It's just the comparison's even harder to make because there's other factors in the mix. But
Come on over. Oh, you could go.
So for global, the exam being one that's totally stimulus-based, so it's very heavy reading. What we realized with this administration was that we needed to work a lot more on stamina in global, and I said it at another board meeting, stamina is huge when it comes to assessments, especially heavy reading assessments, and this global exam was. We also realized that our students were still struggling with visual stimuli, so a document that's a graph, a chart, a map, and it had been something that we saw actually on the older exams, and so we were putting work into it. And then we kind of lightened up because they were doing better, and we realized from this assessment we have to do more on that again. So, you know, it's cohort-based, but there are definitely trends that that we see in the classroom that played out on that assessment. So now we've gone through it once, we know what to do. The tricky thing is that US was supposed to be the new assessment also, and we couldn't experience that. So next year will be year one. We're kind of making predictions, though, based on how we saw this cohort do on global, what we need to focus on in US. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like next year it will be an interesting look back because you'll have two more
we'll have
similar
two.
points of comparison.
That's right. And they both assessments, the next gen is very much about looking at continuity and changes over time. It actually follows suit with what the College Board developed in the new AP assessments. So we're spending a lot of time with students trying to help them make connections over time, which is challenging when you're studying hundreds of years of history in a very short amount of time. That's a skill that takes time to develop.
Yeah.
So
Dr. Thompson, while you're there, so because global is also an AP, are all our sophomores who are AP students also still taking the Regents?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. They do the essay that's on the global regions is very different than what they experience on the AP World exam. So after the AP World exam, they engage in a research project, and at the same time, they basically learn what that essay is going to be about. They have to be exposed to it. So we expose them to it in 9th grade, the type of essay, we expose them to it throughout the year, but they do need to spend more time after the AP exam. So that's what we focus on.
Yep. Thanks.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, sometimes I don't want to, I feel like especially the state assessment, well, and some of the Regents exam, you could draw a pretty strong conclusion, but you don't want to overinterpret data. So I guess I'm asking, in terms of a reality check, when you've talked with faculty, does this sort of match their, that reading and writing, ELA, the student skills didn't decline, but some of the math skills, they are seeing some weakness?
What I've learned is that it's a situation of exposure, right? So that's being addressed, and it's not a situation of whether the children are able to understand or make sense of or work with the information that they've been exposed to, but rather that we have to work and are working, and I would say retroactively have worked, because don't forget, these are early spring administrations. There was still a very large chunk of the school year left after that, during which more teaching and learning took place. And so, yes, there is fallout from the interrupted instruction that has happened that, we're not unique to have been able to escape. But we are very, very purposefully making sure that we make those adjustments so that we get the kids where they need to be. That being said, I also, when you're doing research, you also have to be very careful. Correlation is not the same as causation. And so while, I present the data to you, I don't want to leave here letting a conclusion be drawn based on the information. Though I am confident in it, there is a correlation, but a causal relationship needs to still be something that we determine. Okay?
For ELA, we have the Ames Web, where there are, I guess, if I'm using the word correct, more formative kind of ongoing assessments throughout the year. And for math, is there?
So Ames Web is also used for math.
That's math
But we
too.
also have Dreambox, and at the high school level, there's another assessment tool as well for math. Yep.
And else, we have multiples in ELA as well, correct? In
Yeah.
addition to Ames Web.
So the teachers running records for TC as well as Fontes and Pinnell benchmarking, to name a few, are also things that are conducted throughout the year. But they serve different functions for different teachers at different times, and some are more or less subjective than others, depending upon a whole bunch of different factors, but, you know, certainly give their own information in terms of student progress.
I guess I'm just wondering, because kind of the math was a little bit surprising to me. So I don't know if it was surprising to everybody. If we caught that in sort of the ongoing formative assessments. I don't know if you have a sense of that.
I'll have to get back to you on that, yeah.
And there was a science assessment for 4th grade.
4th and 8th. Well, for 8th grade, it's the students who are not, well, we don't do 8th grade because everybody's in living environment, in earth science. So 4th grade, yes. We haven't historically had any issues. We didn't have any last year. I apologize. I could get you that data separately.
And it's also historically a really easy test.
Yes.
So it's,
And if I
it
remember
doesn't-
correctly, it's not being administered this year because the state is transitioning to it being a 5th grade assessment
Right.
beginning next school
Right.
year.
So, correct. So our current 4th graders will have that assessment in 5th grade, but we wouldn't give them the same assessment in 4th grade and 5th grade. So this current cohort, there will be no 4th grade assessment this year
Right.
administered.
Dr. Bowman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Thompson, for being here tonight, and Ms. Sabia. And I know both of you had some contributions to tonight's presentation, so thank you. And to Dr. Callahan, who couldn't be with us tonight as well. Really appreciate all the efforts that you've put, not just into the presentation, but all the work behind the scenes that we know is going on with your teachers and the curriculum work that you guys have been doing all this time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll go to Whole Child.
Sure, yeah. And
Okay.
then we can jump to, yes.
Okay, so, yeah, Assistant Superintendent's update on Whole Child.
Good evening, everybody. So since we last met a couple of weeks ago, just a couple of brief updates. Dr. Ribeiro, Mr. Lau, and I did meet with one of our district consultants, a neuropsychologist, Dr. Alyssa Vandermeer, on the heels of getting ready for professional development. Dr. Vandermeer is going to be doing training with our special education teachers on some of the newer assessment tools that we're also looking to utilize to dig deeper into identifying where students might be struggling in the areas of reading, writing, and math. The staff was actually due to the reading assessment last year, and Dr. Vandermeer will review that, and she's going to move on to training on the writing assessment this year. In addition, at the secondary level, Dr. Vandermeer is going to review the educational protocol that we use when we test students during special education evaluations, just to make sure as well that our staff really, truly understand connections between test results, classroom performance, and other testing results from other special education subtests. In addition, we want to make sure that we're really taking a closer look and honing in on areas of weakness and making sure that we're not leaving kind of any stone unturned. So we're sort of layering on to things that we already do. Lastly, we're also going to have Dr. Vandermeer work this year with our special education staff on writing clear and effective goals and making sure that the ways in which we're progress monitoring and analyzing are appropriate. And again, her work will begin with our first PLC day, also on October 19th. In terms of wellness, our district support staff did participate in threat assessment mini training that was provided by Alteris. So we just wanted to make sure that our support staff was aware of those protocols and steps that we take in that area. In regards to school counseling, Mr. Farrell wanted to share that deadlines for college applications are just starting. But in addition to that, this coming Wednesday, the 12th, the counseling department is going to be facilitating their annual senior college workshop. This is the opportunity for the seniors to ask questions of their counselors, make sure they are on track with college application deadlines, making sure that their common apps are linked to Naviance, making sure that they have hopefully requested teacher recommendations through Naviance, completing forms, just making sure all of our seniors are on track and their attendance is mandatory for the senior seminar. As I mentioned at the board meeting a couple of weeks ago, financial aid night is October 18th at 7 p.m. The middle school, the high school will be hosting Mrs. Maria Rodriguez from New York State Higher Ed Services Corp., who's going to speak about the financial aid process. All college-bound seniors and their families are invited to attend virtually. If you're applying for financial aid, you can get a jump start by going to www.fafsa.ed.gov. That's always a daunting process, having done that 3 times. Each student has their own PIN, but definitely please attend the financial aid virtual night to get some more information about that process. And lastly, in regards to nursing, I did meet with our nurse coordinator on October 6th. We're again reviewing procedures to ensure that our AE devices in all of our buildings have been checked and maintained. I've also asked her to document all the AED devices we have in each building, the amount and location, so we're sure we know where they are. We're checking on the age and status of all equipment in the nursing offices, such as the audiometers and vision testing materials. In addition, we talked about just making some simple safety changes in the nursing offices, like locked wall mount sharp containers. The nurse coordinator also has been in contact with BOCES, who's supplying our additional COVID kits to districts. Right now, our COVID kit supply is pretty hearty in each building. BOCES had said that unless we're running low, they're not going to necessarily restock us. But as we enter winter and cold season, we're going to make sure that we stay on top of where we are with our COVID kits. In addition, the nurse coordinator reports currently our COVID cases remain low in the district, with the majority of the cases occurring in the middle school and high school right now. We do not have many cases. We do have some cases in the elementary school, but not enough in any one class that has triggered any cluster reporting to the county. So that's good news. These numbers may increase as we move into colder months, and we'll keep the board posting if we see any changes or upticks in what we're seeing. Just lastly, our nurse coordinator, Ms. Squazo, is holding regular meetings with the nurses, and she will meet with them as a group during our also first PLC day on October 19th. That's it for me.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Okay, next.
One
Sure.
quick question on Dr. Bowen's presentation. Will those slides be posted for people who are interested in looking after the fact? Yeah, great. Thank you.
We'll put that,
I will attach it right to it'll be part of the minutes of the board meeting.
okay.
We
Could we put a
also-
link in the board wrap-up
Yes,
thing? Okay.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yep, Alex just took note of that.
okay.
We'll make sure
thanks.
that happens.
Great idea. Okay. Executive Director's update on human resources and leadership.
Sure, just 2 points. I mean, to also reiterate what Tracy was talking about with COVID. So just so people are aware and the community is aware, that law that was passed in 2020 about COVID leave is still applicable. Employees can take such a leave if they test positive 3 times throughout their employment with us. That hasn't sunset, so that still exists with us and all employees and employers. Also, there's the vaccine law whereby the district has to provide at least 4 hours for an individual to go get a vaccine or a booster as well. That does not apply if you don't feel well after the booster. If you don't feel well after a booster or shot, that's a sick day. But those laws are still in the books, and that's, I think, important for everyone to notice. And the rates are pretty low, but still, I mean, it's still happening, as we know. I know personally. In terms of the assistant principal search for the high school, just to update the community too, is that we had over 100 applicants for the position. We reviewed all those applicants and also their resumes and cover letters and credentials, so forth. We invited 16 back to meet with us through some screening interviews starting actually tomorrow morning, and also on Thursday they'll meet with Dr. Bowman, Ms. Holtz, and also Dr. Champ and myself, and also Mr. Berkowitz will be part of those screening interviews. So we'll meet with all those candidates. Hopefully by Friday we'll have a better sense of who we would like to invite back for next week when we have a stakeholder committee interviews, similar to what was done at the end of August. And hopefully we will we'll really bring to the board some excellent finalists that you can meet with in early November. So we're still on track. I actually thought, I mean, just in terms of my professional eye, I thought that this round, there are some good candidates in this round. I reviewed all the resumes last time as well. I just think that maybe it was a better, I don't want to say a better pool, it was still a broad pool of candidates. So we look forward to sharing that with you in November.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? Okay, should we let the,
If I can start, and then
okay,
I
sure.
will segue.
So
if that works,
Assistant
all right.
Superintendent's update on finance and facilities.
Hi, thank you, and good evening. This evening, for the board, we have our external auditors, who I'm going to introduce towards the completion of my report. Just to kind of give a brief overview of where we are right now, last week, we did hold an audit committee meeting. So this is where, for those other members on the audit committee, this presentation this evening will look very similar. But audit items discussed, obviously, were the financials from the fiscal year 21-22. We also discussed our internal audit work plan for the year. The 3 areas of work for this year are cash activities, payroll withholdings, and purchasing. So those are the 3 areas that our internal auditor will be focusing on. This evening, there's a couple items on the board's agenda related to change orders. These are notification change orders related to work that was done over the summer through our site contractor, Casal Contracting. One item is for the top coat for the parking lot at Hutchinson School, which was used today for the first time. So we're happy to see that being used.
Finally.
And we saw some less cars on the road, so that's encouraging too. We're, again, grateful to the neighbors for their patience. It's been a long slog, and that's really great. The other change order was for some new sidewalks on the corner of 3rd and Lincoln. When the contractor was there, when we really looked at the work, there was a real hodgepodge or patchwork of sidewalk there, and it didn't really look very nice, and some of it was in need of replacing anyway. So at that point in time, while they're deployed, this was really the time to have that done. And the third was, if you drive in that similar area, as you go by, you'll see there's kind of a large concrete wall holding up, attached to the former building, and holding up a corner of that site. That was a first step to stabilize that wall so that they could finish the site work up top. And then there is going to be another change order, which I would bring to the board, quite honestly, it'll be to finish that off, to make it look a lot better than it looks right now. I think it's pretty unsightly. But what we wanted to do, just to make sure we could get everything ready for the beginning of the school year, is to make sure that hill was stabilized. And that piece of concrete there was put in place to really plug that part of the hill where there wasn't anything holding up the hill. So those are the 3 items. Again, those are all for board notification. They're below the threshold required for board approval. So if we just haven't had these in a while, I figure it's a good opportunity to bring them up to the board. Still work going on for our regular capital projects at Prospect Hill. We are still waiting on some of our parts. I think at our security vestibule, we're still waiting on the inside buzzer to allow visitors to come in. So right now, our greeter has to vet anybody who's coming in. They'll buzz people in the front door with the regular buzzer that you would see when you visit our school. But then to enter the school after you've been vetted, that person just needs to stand up and open the door for them. So it's a little inconvenient for them, but safety and security-wise, it's still very, very much secure and much safer and a better process than where we were before. certainly inconvenient, and it's just a matter of waiting for those parts to come in. So we're excited to get that taken care of. The interior work here at the high school, middle school is moving along, and I snuck into the site today and I kind of walked through it. It looks like the HVAC is coming in nicely. The floors will certainly be next. And at the end of the day, the casework, which is the cabinetry, is going to be the delay because that has such a long lead time, and they're experiencing the greatest delays with that. But in the meantime, they are still moving forward, and we have folks there every day and working to make sure that we secure that site while they're working in the building. Again, if they work from one site to the other, we ask that they walk around the building or outside and not through the school. So we're working really hard to do that. So some questions. I mean, I did receive a question about our food services. Sometimes our food services group still does have some items. They may not always be able to fulfill all of the items on the food menu every day. And this is because the food menu is made a month ahead of time. They receive their deliveries of the week, and sometimes they may not get a full allotment or not an allotment at all. Many times it's a minor transgression. So say it's popcorn chicken, we'd have chicken nuggets, and that's a nice and easy substitution. I say a minor transgression for a child that may be a little bit larger. But other times it may just be more of a difference in an entire menu. So we're working with Whitson's. They certainly are not happy about it either because they're planning a menu and building a menu based on these items. For the elementary schools, we have one entree per day because, of course, we prepare our food, one hot entree every day. We prepare our food at the high school and then transport it hot. But if a child wants, there's always a sandwich option, and there's always a meatless sandwich option too. We use sun butter and jelly, so there's always a fallback option for our students if it's not what they thought it was going to be for that day. And hopefully these things will get squared away. We also had, it's a sore spot. Tomorrow it shouldn't be a sore spot. Pizza day for all the elementary schools. Hutchinson didn't get it last week because it was Wednesday and we didn't have school on Wednesday. So Wednesday, after tomorrow, hopefully we'll have all smiley faces and pizza for everybody. So I know it's a lot of work. It gets a little crazy because there's such great participation that day, but we understand that it's working nicely. So that's exciting too.
Is
kind
that
of bringing
coordinated
it
by
back.
Whitson's also? Or
It
that
is.
separate? It is, okay.
So that's
Great.
coordinated through Whitson's, and they coordinate, so you can pay with your meal card, same idea. And then, of course, one slice is usually not enough for some of our elementary students, and then they can go back and they can buy a second slice. But the regular lunch is one slice. Let's see, where else am I? So let me go back again. We have our auditors here tonight. We have Mark Callanan, who is our senior audit manager here this evening, and Alan Cassay, our audit partner. These gentlemen are kind of, I think they're more in demand than most people this time of the year. Alan, this may be your second or third visit this evening for us. It's your second tonight. I'm sure your record's probably 3 or 4 in a night this time of the year. So thank you for coming here tonight. They're going to share with you the financial results. Again, this is the results and the presentation that was shared with the audit committee on Monday. And with that too, we are very early in the year. We're fortunate to have a very talented business office staff, our district treasurer, Jackie Vigil, everyone else in the business office. And again, we thank the partnership with O'Connor Davies coming in, and we're the first ones. So we're the testers every year, but thank you, and I'll turn it over to Mark and to Alan right now.
Thank you very much. As previously mentioned, Chris, who is the engagement partner, did meet with the board and the audit committee to have the required audit committee meeting to go over the draft of the financial statements, which the board has to approve. And tonight we're just going to give you a summary of that meeting. So for tonight's agenda, we're going to go over the required communications. The general fund, we'll look at the 2002 revenues and expenditures compared to the budget. The major revenues in the general fund, a 3-year revenue history, 2022 major expenditures and a 3-year expenditure history, and then a 3-year fund balance analysis for the general fund, and then a fund balance analysis for the other funds, and some of your debt service schedules. Included in some of the required communications is the responsibility of management and those charged with governance. One of them is to select and implement appropriate accounting policies, and I could say that the management letter had no significant or material weaknesses, so you're doing that. Fairly present the financial statements in accordance with the U.S. GAAP. Establish and maintain effective internal controls over financial reporting. Comply with all the laws, regulations, and contracts and grants received, and providing all the financial records related information to the auditors, and setting the proper tone at the top. Our responsibility include deliverables, the independent auditor's report. An unmodified opinion was issued. It's also known as a clean opinion, the best opinion you could receive, and that was based on our audit. The Yellow Book report, it's a report on controls and the report on compliance for each major federal program. In your special aid fund, you receive several federal grants, and if you exceed expenditures over $750,000, you're required to have what's known as a single audit. And we select various programs, and for each program selected, there's a separate compliance supplement, and we test to make sure that the district is in compliance with those attributes. The extra classroom activities report, the required communications, which is also known as the management letter, which is indicated there. Communicate any fraud or illegal acts that were identified during the audit. There were none noted. No difficulties were encountered during the audit. No uncorrected misstatements, no disagreements with management. And the timeline was the prelims were done in June, the end of June. That's where we come in and we test the controls, your payroll cycle, your cash receipts, cash disbursements, claims. The field work, which is where we come out into the field and actually do the audit, was the week of July 11th, and it was completed on September 2nd. Okay, Mark's going to now go over some of the general fund revenues and expenditures compared to your budget.
Thanks, Alan. So I'm just going to go through your general fund revenues and expenditures. Your general fund's the operating fund of the school district. So on this slide, this is just a macro level, a summary of your general fund in total. The column all the way to the left is your original budget, which is adopted and voted on by the voters, approved by the board. Next column over is your final budget with any budget modifications that was approved by the board during the year. The column in the middle is your actual, what actually happened during the year. Next column is your encumbrances, which are open purchase orders that are rolled. And then just the last column is your variance between your actual and your final budget. So during the year, your original budget and your final budget for revenues came in a little over 78 million. Your actual came in about 79 million, so you had a budget surplus of about 836,000. Your original budget for expenditures was 75 million, adjusted slightly to 75.3. Your actual expenditures came in at 71.9. So you, with the rollover purchase orders, you had a budget surplus of $2.6 million in your expenditures. So just to point out what that really means, if you go 3 lines from the top, it says net change in fund balance. The district's plan for the year was to utilize $1.8 million of the general fund's fund balance. Adjusted slightly for some tax certs, your final budget was to utilize $2 million of your fund balance. What actually happened during the year was you had a savings and an increase to fund balance of $538,000. So if you look all the way to the right in your variance column, you had a budget savings of about $1.9 million. Some of those variances, as I mentioned before, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in the next few slides. But so you started the year at $20.7 million in your fund balance in the general fund. You ended your year at $21.2 million. Next slide is just some of your major revenues. The columns are similar, just with 2021, so you can compare year to year. Now, with the revenues, this isn't all your revenues for the general fund. This is just a snapshot. This is the majority of your revenues, your larger revenues. You could see the first two revenues on there, your property tax and your STAR revenue. This year, you received $65 million and $2.2 million, which came in right with your budget, because you levy that when you approve your budget. I'm happy to say that the district stayed within the cap, so kudos to the district. Going down, your non-property tax distribution, that's the sales tax from the county. You can see there you budgeted $950,000, actually came in at 1.2, so you had a budget surplus of $266,000. That 950, the board decided, with the flux in the beginning of the year was still kind of a rollover from COVID, not knowing exactly what was going to happen, so the 950 was a conservative budget, which you can see most school districts did and was the right thing to do. So budget surplus of $266,000 in your sales tax. Going down, your day school tuition, you could see that stayed steady year to year. You came in slightly above budget at $63,000. Going down, your state aid, large increase from the prior year. A lot of your state aid is formula-based from New York State. So your basic aid was a lot larger this year. You had a budget surplus of $222,000. What that's made up of is you actually, based on budget, received a little less than what you expected in your basic aid, but that was made up for with about $350,000 more than you expected in your BOCES aid. So you received $222,000 more than budget for your state aid. Your federal aid, you could see there was nothing budgeted there. The majority of that $156,000 is FEMA aid. Yes.
Sorry, just to follow along, because we have a financial statements, ECAF report, and a management letter. So are these statements in one of those documents, or?
Yeah, this is just a snapshot of what is in the independent auditor's report.
Okay.
The largest one. It's about 100 pages or so. Yeah.
You can find this information on page.
And this entire report will be posted similar to Dr. Bowman's report,
Right, yeah.
with the final minutes.
Oh, okay.
Page 59 of this report, you'll have the details.
Okay,
of what Mark's talking about.
okay, thanks.
So just getting back, the federal aid is the FEMA aid the district received that you wouldn't budget for in the beginning of the year because that's emergency assistance. Lastly, there's your transfers in from your debt service. The district budgeted to transfer in from your debt service fund $1.6 million. The general fund did much better than expected, so that transfer in wasn't needed. So that's why you see there was no transfer made to the general fund from the debt service. The next slide is just those same revenue categories, just a 3-year history of them. This is more informational, helps with budgeting. So that's that. The next slide is your major expenditures. Now, when we do this, it's a little bit harder to pinpoint major expenditures just because when you do your budget, there's a lot more expenditure lines. But we did our best to try and pinpoint some of your larger expenditures for the years and the ones that variate from the budget a little bit. That first line there is your operations of maintenance and plant, which is the maintenance of the grounds, maintenance and repairs of schools. You can see your final budget was 6.1. Your actual expenditures for the year was 5.1. The big reason for the budget savings there was, again, the rollover of COVID. So in the beginning of the year, there wasn't as many expenditures as you would expect. So there was a lot of savings in the beginning of the year. Towards the end of the year, we kind of got back into a little bit more normal. So that's why the budget variance there. Next line you have there is your teaching regular school. Just some salary savings in that line make up that budget variance. Moving on, programs for student with disabilities. You had a budget savings there of $508,000. That's 1 or 2 less students than anticipated. Pupil transportation. Final budget was 1.3, came in about 1.1, budget savings of 155,000. Again, beginning of the school year, not as many extracurricular activities, not a lot of transportation was needed. I can say probably going into this next year with the fuel price increase, you can expect that line of actual to increase. And now that you're back to more normal, that line will increase. Employee benefits, budget savings, that's just vacant positions, normal course of the year savings. And then that last line's your transfers out. And the majority of that transfers out is to fund your debt service fund, the principal and interest payments on the outstanding debt, mainly the bonds. And the small budget variance is there is a transfer out to special aid. Not as much was needed to give to special aid to budget to balance special aid this year. So small budget savings there. Next slide, again, is just a 3-year expenditure history of those same expenditure lines, just more informational for the board. Moving on. This next slide is your fund balance for the general fund, a 3-year history of it. So the fund balance in the general fund is broken out into buckets. As you can see, non-spendable, restricted, assigned, unassigned. Non-spendable is your prepaid expenditures. That was prepaid in 21-22 for expenditures in 22-23. So that's earmarked for expenditures in the next school year, so it's non-spendable. So it falls into that bucket. The next is restricted. A lot of these have caps on them. A lot of them have very stringent rules to them. The largest there you could see is your tax cert reserve. That's used to pay your tax certs. You have about 30 to 35% coverage exposure, which is what us at auditors would basically recommend a district have. Then going down, there's some unemployment restrictions, the EBLR restrictions. You have an ERS and TRS reserve, property damage repairs, and then future capital projects. So restricted fund balance in the general fund is 14.3 million, slightly up from last year. Normal increases there. Going to your assigned, purchases on order, those are the encumbrances. Those are rolled forward. Purchase orders. The next line is your subsequent year's expenditures, which is a portion of next year's budget you use to balance the current year's budget. You could see that increase slightly from the year before. And then the last piece of the fund balance is your unassigned fund balance. And that's the amount of fund balance that is free of any restrictions to use by the school district. New York State limits all school districts to only having 4% of the budget in your unassigned. Your school district is right at that 4% and has been for the last 3 years. And you'll see that at most school districts. Your total fund balance, the 21.2, is about 25% of your budget, which also is comparable to the last few years.
So the debt service fund, that's not part of that slide?
This is not part of this. The debt service fund, on the next slide is actually, we listed the fund balances of the rest of your funds.
Okay.
The debt service fund is used to pay your debt. It's funded from the other funds, but it's not paid out of it's funded by the general fund, but it's not a part of your general fund. You move it to the debt service fund. So
Can-
here,
There's a capital reserve fund.
yes, there's a capital projects
Future
fund.
capital projects.
That's restricted for future capital projects. That's separate from your capital fund, but it's,
Is that the turf field?
Yes.
That's the turf field, okay.
so moving on. So going past your general fund for a second, the district has other funds, as you mentioned, and these are just a quick snapshot of the fund balances in all those other funds. So going across, you can see your capital projects fund. Your ending fund balance is almost 8 million, but that's not just 8 million the district can use. That's bonded money that I'm sure at this point of the 22-23 district school year has a lot of it's been used during the summer. So that's all bonded money. Your debt service fund, you can see just a slight increase in your fund balance this year. You can see the expenditures and the other financing sources. That's basically the general fund funding your debt service payments. School lunch fund is obviously self-explanatory, your school lunch fund. The school lunch fund, New York State tells you that you should only have 3 months of expenditures in your school lunch fund. Your school lunch fund balance is quite healthy. It's a little over that. It's a little in excess, but very healthy fund balance there. Your special purpose fund, that's just donations to the school district. And also special purpose fund is where you have your extra classroom activities, the high school and middle school clubs. So of that 515,000, about 135 of it is your extra classroom activities. And then the last one's just a permanent fund, which is an endowment fund. Not much movement this year.
For the lunch,
Yes.
that's restricted. I guess that can only be spent on
That can
certain
only be
things.
spent on school lunch, yeah.
And then to lower the fund balance, and maybe you're going to talk about this more later, but
To lower the fund balance there, you would want to use it for just one-time expenditures.
I could talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that. Generally, our plan would be, as Mark described, we would use it for equipment improvements, if there were any equipment improvements. New lunch tables, those are things that we're looking at. We could use it to cover some part-time expenses if we have monitors who cover lunch, something to that, something like that. What we've looked into, and we've been told we can't do, I'll be perfectly honest, is air conditioning a cafeteria. We tried. You can't do it. So it's unfortunate, but that's something you could do. Some school districts have decided to say, let's have free breakfast everywhere. And you can do that. Of course, when you get to a point where your fund balance is depleted, then you need to get
Then
back
what?
to a point of charging people. And of course, with the shaming laws, if a student presents themselves for a meal, we present them with they receive that meal. And we don't question whether or not they have any funds in their account or not. So that would, if you create a pattern, you risk that, perhaps that happening at a later date.
it has to be spent on something in some way lunch-related.
Yes, so I'll receive a letter from from Food Services up at the state, and they'll ask me to say, well, what do you think you can spend it on? How can you use this? Something, actually, I was talking, Jackie and I were speaking about this evening. As long as she's been here, she's received that letter. We've received that letter every year. It's been a little bit just more difficult with other things going on to spend it down on things like lunch tables, especially when we weren't using lunch tables for quite some time. And then the newer tables, I'll get into a little bit more of it because we have thought about it. The newer tables take up a little bit more room. So in the places where we're tight space, they don't fold up quite as tight. So we want to make sure we get the right equipment.
And a lot of school districts that we audit are in a similar situation.
Yeah, and I would say the last 2 years of universal free lunch has really done a job on a lot of school districts' fund balances. It's not uncommon for districts, in some districts that were turning deficits to have surpluses at this point in time too. What'll be interesting now is what happens now that we're off of universal free lunch. All students are paying. And then, as I mentioned, there are students if they present for a lunch, they receive a lunch, whether they have funding or not. We cannot use the lunch fund to cover any of those shortfalls. So that has to be made up by the general fund at the end of the day.
That's fascinating.
Things we looked into, though.
And then this last slide is just the debt service. This is your outstanding debt for the school district. This is more informational, but you can see there's about $76.7 million left in outstanding bonds. Most of that is the bond that was issued in 2020. And then the bottom schedule is just the amortization of when those payments are going to be made. And as you can see, in the next 15 years, most of that will be paid off. And then just that last piece there was a new GASB pronouncement this year, GASB 87, where the district had to record their leases as long-term debt. So that last piece it's always been there, it's just recorded slightly different this year. So it's a new pronouncement, it looks a little different on the statement this year, but it's always been there in some capacity. Other than that, I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments.
And GASB stands for Governmental Accounting Standards Boards. So we had a new pronouncement for leases. We do have out clauses on our leases, which don't take us to full term, but the pronouncement requires that we record the full value of the lease.
Right.
Were there any significant talking points from the audit committee on this?
I mean, we went through all of the same information. The only other thing that we talked about when we were talking about the debt service slide was how lucky we got with timing and interest rates, and that was quite beneficial to us over the course of the full bond, not just in any particular audit. But I think we've covered everything that we spoke about in committee. There were no concerns with pushing this forward and making a recommendation that we vote on it to approve it.
I think if I could add in, the one other item was the corrective action plan, and that was related to observations on internal controls, fairly common to school districts, segregation of duties with our clubs. If I'm jumping ahead, Mark, and you're going to talk about this.
Nope.
I apologize.
That's all.
Okay. We have some inactive clubs, so it's just making sure that inactive clubs with available balances, we make sure we're aware of that. Some delayed receipts, when monies are collected, we want to get those monies deposited as quickly as possible, and they observed some delay in those receipts, and the school lunch, which we discussed. So this evening, there's a corrective action plan for the board and on how we expect to address these internal observations that they had. With that, our responsibility is once the board approves the external audit, we report it to the state. The reporting deadline is October the 15th. And at the same time, we are required to post this on the district's website, which if you have an opportunity and you're looking for something to do, we have all of our external audits, our corrective action plans, and our internal audits up on the district's webpage.
This is sort of more of a conceptual, I guess, observation, which is, I guess, the two sort of punchlines that I'm getting from tonight are, from this presentation, that the district is in financial good health. Thank you to everyone who spends conservatively and spends wisely. And the second sort of punchline is that there are pockets of the student body that have maybe struggling in certain areas of academics. And I don't think that those two sort of concepts or conclusions from tonight's materials need to be separate. And to the extent that the district can find any ways to take advantage of our financial good health in creative ways, in immediate ways, in responsible ways to, try and offset some of the, less encouraging results we saw in Dr. Bowman's excellent presentation, I would really urge the board to do that, or the district to do that.
Could you go to the slide about the debt service fund? So I know you mentioned that, and so we, because I can't see it, so
Yeah,
it's hard
I
for me to-
actually have it
Sorry.
closer if you want to take a look. It's not that you would see necessarily
Oh,
the
okay.
reflection of interest rates in that schedule,
Uh-huh.
but it was just something that we noted, that, we did have new issuance of debt in 2020, but we were able, because of timing, to take advantage of rates. There are some districts that bonded at different times. Obviously, anyone bonding right now, not going to be so happy, but, in terms of our overall long-term payments, we locked it in at a good time, which was definitely luck as opposed to anything else. But
In this report, starting on page 39,
Mhm.
talks about all your long-term debt, and it has some of the same information, but it has additional information.
Okay.
The actual debt service fund is on page 73 and 74.
All right.
Okay.
So we're voting to approve the audit?
Yeah,
that'd be
thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we have 5.1 is communications and comments from the public.
I think we're good there.
All right, 6.1 is motion to accept the independent auditor's reports. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any comments or questions? No, all in favor? Any opposed, any abstentions? 6.2 is a motion to approve the district's corrective action plan in response to the independent auditor's report. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
I know he's not here to hear it, but just want to
Yeah.
thank Jim and Jackie and the entire business office for just their, Jim, just thanking you and Jackie and the entire business office for the incredible work that you guys do day in and day out. Really appreciate everything that went into these audits and to the, just making everything work.
Thank you. We got a great team, and thank you to the members of the audit committee as well for volunteering their time.
And the corrective actions basically were bringing down the lunch
Yes.
and then some things around club.
Right, so what we'll do is and this is a very, very common issue with the segregation of duties. When you look at the corrective action plan, you'll look at some of the dollar amounts of the inactive dollars. It's
De minimis.
a couple $100, sometimes under $100. But it's a good opportunity, again, to look at those numbers, making sure we're spending those monies, because again, these are dollars that were raised by student groups. And ideally, I mean, the way it's really supposed to run is that these groups are supposed to be run by students, and they're supposed to do the cash management, and supposed to do the accounting and everything else. It sounds wonderful, but there's also the real-life implications, and we want to make sure everything is done the right way. So it's not uncommon, and we kind of do it every year, and we remind ourselves, we make sure everyone's aware of the cash receipts. We look at those accounts. We send our notice of how we plan on spending those monies to the state for food services. And again, you kind of see it through with the board. And segregation of duties is harder sometimes in smaller organizations.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? All right, I'll do 6.3 through 6.7 as a consent agenda. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Any comments or questions?
I was just going to add, on 6.7, that's the approval for a trip, our band and jazz band and chamber chorus to go to a competition in Orlando. So we are back to field trips. I'm just really excited, appreciative to those teachers who take on those major opportunities for our students. It's a really great opportunity, memorable experiences for our students, chance to be adjudicated out of state by some new adjudicators, and to have a little bit of fun along the way. So we're happy to be sending them.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? No. Okay. 6.8 is a motion to accept donation. Jessica used to read these, correct?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
just
will
that
read.
top part.
Resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education of the Pelham Union Free School District does hereby accept the monetary donation of $26,520 to support the Academy Plus after-school program at the Pelham Memorial High School, and that gratitude be bestowed upon its donor, the Pelham Civic Association. So, motion. Do I need a motion? Yeah.
We need one.
Motion to approve,
Seconded.
accept this? Okay. We're good? Sue?
I think we needed a motion first, but I think you seconded, so I'll motion.
Yep.
And then
Okay.
you can second.
Oh, I thought you motioned it.
All right.
Good.
Then
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? No. Thank you, Pelham Civics Association.
Very generous grant.
Yeah. Yes. And they're having their gala
Just as another reminder.
this week, pelhamcivics.org.
And as we talk about the bond, Mike Volpe was a huge champion of all of that process. So
Very much so.
I'm happy to see him honored.
All right, we already did 7.1. So we have 7.2, I'll do 7.2 through 7.4 as a consent agenda. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Yes, Jessica and Natalie. Any comments or questions?
This is the appointments, right? Of various.
The
We did the
7-2
first
to
one already.
7-4, yeah.
I see Latin is back, or was Latin ever not available? It's great. I
Where
think
is
it's-
that?
No, Latin's always been there.
Yeah.
It's
always been there.
increased in responsibilities, in overage, I think.
Which is a good thing.
But Latin is phasing.
Well, it also, the Latin teacher's certified to do E&L classes, so she also, that's where a lot of the growth is. It's not saying the Latin program has grown, it's still there, but it's her additional duties.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
But long-term Latin is phasing out, is that?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Schedule D, 8.1. Do I have a motion?
So moved?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? No. Any new business?
I just wanted to mention a sort of random comment, but I know I shared with the board and Dr. Champ that one of our former board members, Krista Akampora, who Sue and I served with in our first year during the infamous bond year, was appointed Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Virginia, where I attended with my husband, and which is wonderful for our little town of Pelham that she's been launched on the map in such a big way. But this past weekend, I got to see her in action because I was down at a board meeting for a different board I sit on, and it was just really awesome to see her in front of a huge room and with such exciting and important things to say, and also serving in that way at the college level. And here, it's just, I think, a good reconciliation that what we deal with here in our schools is in so many ways so similar to what academia is dealing with when our students launch. So just wanted to throw that in the mix. She's up meeting alumni this week in the Northeast, but I couldn't get her to drive around Hutchinson School because she's that booked. But I promised I would send her some pictures, and I told her all about it. So just wanted to throw that in.
10 is another opportunity for communications and comments from the public. And seeing none.
Mr. President, Dr. President, do I have a motion? Could you entertain a motion to adjourn?
Yes. Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.